If you like the content Unfound provides, please support this podcast at Patreon, PayPal, or YouTube. Unfound's first episode debuted on the first Friday of September 2016. Yes, 7 years ago today. During that time, this podcast has covered 303 disappearances. To recognize this anniversary, you get to hear the first interview I ever conducted. Then after, I will reflect on some of the big moments in Unfound's history. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. On the phone now, I have Mrs. Mary Lau, the mother of Suzanne. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's start with you just talking a little bit about Suzanne, what was going on in her life at the time, maybe a little bit about her upbringing, her education, her interests.
Okay. Well, Susie was born in April of 1978, and right from the beginning, we kind of knew she had a lot, of intelligence. My husband always said there was, he could see that in her. And as she, grew up, by the time she was about 9 years old, she was writing poetry, and from writing poetry to wanting to, she started to hear about computers, and I think our first computer was a Texas Instrument computer, and she really was fascinated with those. And she, really got into the computer area, and, eventually, would take computers apart and rebuild them.
Yes.
And she...
and how old would she have been at this time? A teenager?
Oh, she was a young teenager, maybe 13, 14 years old. She was the only kid in school who actually knew anything about computers. At the time in school, they were just getting one into the library. It's a fairly big school district, but, the libraries in the different schools had one computer, and if it would break down, nobody knew anything about computers, and they would call Susie to come and see if she could fix it, which she usually could. And, she really, she had people around her all the time just fascinated by the fact that she typed so fast, and she could, bring up all sorts of information on the computer.
Where do you think that she got this from?
I have absolutely no idea.
No idea?
It just seemed to come, and like I said, she was into writing poetry, so she was using a typewriter, and and then of course when a computer came around, she could type all that information out on the computer, and save all her poetry that way. So she really had a lot going for her. When she was in high school, she was on the Honor Society. She was a very bright girl, and
it's interesting to me that she seems like she has this, what would it be? I don't know if the word is a dichotomy of, on one hand, being very technical, but on the other hand, being very, I would maybe, if I could say this, artsy fartsy in poetry, because I could say that because I'm artsy fartsy, but really having a passion for the arts, but having a passion for computers as well, which is a really unique combination.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's basically what she was, and we could never understand, even as a real young child, some of the poetry that she would come up with that was, just so far beyond her, years. I mean, comparing things like. When it rained one day, and she wrote a poem about rain and how the rain sounded like thundering hoofs of a horse, coming down the driveway.
Right.
Just really, far out ideas of how she put this all together. together. We just don't know where it came from. One interesting thing was one day she was taking a shower, and she jumped out of the shower. She had soap in her hair, towel wrapped around her, and she ran down the hall, and they said, "Where are you going?" And she said she just got the idea for a poem, and she had to write it down before she forgot it. So, even doing that would be, poems were just coming into her head all the time. She even wrote poems about the places that she would write a poem. One time writing a poem on the back of I think she had some bunion pads or something. It was the only paper she had. So she wrote a poem on the back of that. Just things like that she could, really came to her. She had to write it down. Backs of napkins. I mean, it was just, it was constantly coming into her. And after she disappeared, my husband and I went through her books, which were tons of paper, and I couldn't believe all the poems that she wrote. I could not believe it.
She was a young woman who was very in touch with her feelings and could express them, not just not just speaking, but writing them down, which is a particularly unique talent.
Yes, yeah, that's where she was coming from, and we don't know where she got it from, but it just seemed to happen. And
well, having a wide, diverse array of interests like that is usually a sign of good parenting too. You should know, so you should be commended for that. But I'm sure you're happy though that she chose to go into computers for school instead of poetry, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right.
I always wondered, if a poet could make it in this world. And I know there was a time when the school would publish, art type things that children had done, actually, I'm calling them children, but high school students would do art type work. And in order to, some of the stuff that she wrote, she said in order to get it published in this booklet, which was a once-a-year booklet, was kind of on the dark side. For some reason, that's what kids like to read. Yeah. So, some of her poetry at that point was very dark sounding. And when I spoke to people who worked at the school, they said they would get booklets from all the different schools, and most of the booklets were very dark. Just that's what kids were like.
Teenagers.
Yeah, good teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers.
Right.
So she goes to school, but she ends up going to one school. And what was that school again? She transferred.
Oh, she went to SUNY Oneonta, which is about 100 miles from where we live. Kind of, down in kind of mid New York. And when she went there, she took a computer science class, and by the end of the year, she said that it was, really she could teach the teachers. Yeah. They didn't have the knowledge that she had at that point about computers. So she decided that she would transfer to a bigger school, and that's when she came up to SUNY Albany, which, maybe 35, 40 miles from here. Right. So she moved a little closer. I was kind of against it. I really didn't want her to move closer, but the classes that she could take at that school were, a little more challenging. I think that's what she was looking for. Something
that's interesting. You didn't want her to move back closer to where you lived? That's interesting.
I really felt like I had two other children who, both of them went away, to school, one 5 hours away, one 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours away. I just really felt like their ability to grow a little bit was to be able to be further away from home. With her being so close to home, it was not that I didn't want her. Yeah. That's not the point. Yeah. But with her being so close to home, I just felt like she wasn't going to experience the, learning how to live out on the world on your own a little bit better.
Yeah, see, my mom to this day is still the opposite. If I could have gone to college in my bedroom at home in 1989, she would have. So once again, that's why I had to ask you about that. How did she feel? she'd just be a few years younger than me. I was born in 1970. She would be a few years, like, what year was she born again? 78. 78. So so she was born the same year as my nephew. Okay. So I know even at the time, even the early 90s, mid 90s, computers for women was still kind of in its infancy. How did she feel about having these classes and having an interest in something that was so male dominated?
I don't know. I think she just felt very good about knowing what she knew, and she was very helpful to anybody who asked her if they could, if she could help them, with their problems. And many times, after a class, somebody would come up to her and say, geez, I'm having trouble with a certain thing. Can you help me out? So I think she felt good about that. I really, I know she did. That she was able to, help other people who, with her knowledge.
Yeah, because the way I remember it, I think that women going into engineering and computers and math is much more common now. But I think at the time, a lot of women stayed away from this stuff. They might have had the interest, but they didn't because it was such a male-dominated industry. So I think that once again says something that very unique about her. How did she do at Albany? Switching to a tougher school. How was she doing?
I don't think she. The thing is, I think with being in college, when you go to a college, you make friends. In your freshman year, and you kind of stay with those friends throughout the whole schooling. When she switched, she had a little more trouble, making close acquaintances because you don't have that orientation that you would have when you start out as a freshman. She was already a sophomore, so she didn't really have a lot of close friends. She had friends, but, nobody she could say, this is my closest friend. I met her, last year. So I think she had a little more trouble when she came up. I'm wondering if she, made a mistake, coming closer. Of course, we know it was a mistake.
Yeah.
But, just the fact that she, needed some.
I mean, she was. Let's just put it this way: she was getting passing grades and all the.
Oh yeah,
okay.
She was. Yeah, no, she didn't have that problem. The problem was, basically, the fact that it was harder for her to fit into groups.
The social life, the socializing that goes along with college. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I guess that brings us to the man that she eventually did meet, and through a computer club. Explain to the listeners how that happened with meeting Richard Condon.
Yeah, she actually met him before she went to college. She was about 11th grade and heard about this computer group that would meet once a week at a local restaurant, and convinced my husband to take her to this place. And so my husband would take her down there, once a week to meet with these people. And some of them were older. That was something that bothered me a lot. And there were quite a few, male type people.
Of course.
More and. So actually just recently became acquainted with somebody. I didn't, but I found out about somebody who was the person who actually introduced Suzanne to her boyfriend, the one she finally wound up with. Yeah. And the reason that he did was because Susie was interested in learning how to do some it's not working here. Learning how to do computer programming.
Okay, and like a particular computer language or something like that?
Yes, and she did not know how to do that, and she had heard that this guy, who eventually became her boyfriend, was an expert at programming, and so he introduced her to to this guy's name is Rich, introduced him to Rich, and that's how they got acquainted, was because he taught Susie some computer programming. And she used, we all use Microsoft Word. Everybody uses Microsoft Word. But she and Rich got into using Linux, which is, a lot more difficult a program. So that's how they really got to know each other, and he thought, wow, he was pretty in tune with computers, and to meet up with a girl that knew so much about computers was kind of wow.
So that was the level on which they identified with each other. That's where they really bonded, I guess you could say, was with the computers. How long was it? Now, he was how many years older than she was?
About a year and a half now.
Okay,
he
so
was one grade ahead of her. When she was in 11th, he was in 12th. So.
And he was organizing this at this restaurant at that early age.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was another guy who was building computers and tearing them apart and making bigger and better computers at the time when they weren't. I mean, our cell phones now have more memory than those computers did. But
yes.
That many years ago, 18, 19, 20 years ago, we're talking about, top-of-the-line computers that they were putting together.
So how much longer after that did they become a couple? Was it when she went to college, when she went to Albany? Because he ended up going to the same school as...
Yeah, no, he actually never did go to the same school as she did.
Okay.
He went to a Catholic boys' school in the area, and she, of course, went to a local high school up here in Ballston Spa, where we're from. But when he went off to college, he went to RPI, which Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, and Susie was still in high school. And then the following year, she went to Oneonta, which, like I said, is about 100 miles from here.
Right.
So, so they never went to the same schools together. They just got to know each other, I think, through that, those meetings in the restaurant. And then once, they had those meetings, that's how they,
that's how they started dating.
That's how they started dating.
And at the time that Suzanne disappeared, how long had they been a couple? And I know there's some. We'll get into the particulars of that, but how long had they been a couple?
I think they'd been together about 2.5 years, maybe, because she started dating him sometime as a junior in high school, and then she disappeared as a freshman or a sophomore in college. So about 2.5 years or so.
Okay. We're going to come back to her boyfriend in a moment, but before you came on the air, I went through the facts of her disappearance and what she did that day and some of the times and things like that. I just want to clear up a couple things because here we are in 2016, and I just want to get straight a couple facts. First of all, I'm sure if people are familiar with their daughter's case, they've heard about the man in the baseball hat that appears at that convenience store around the time that her ATM card was used the next day. What can you tell him? That guy has been exonerated, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
Okay.
And it took a long time before the police actually located him, but they finally did, and pretty much decided, I mean, that's what they told me, is that, anything that they found out from him, didn't put him in that place, or didn't put him taking Suzanne. So that's really all I can tell you about that.
Right.
I don't know any more than what the police told me.
Right. Well, and I just want my listeners to get it straight from your mouth because, like I said, there are still sites out there that maybe haven't been updated in a while, or they don't know some of the news that that can kind of put people off in maybe the wrong direction. And of course, if the police say that somebody's not being looked at anymore, then we want to make sure that we put that out there. The other point is about her name tag from her job that she was at that night. It wasn't seen near that bus stop where she got off for about 2 months later? Like she disappeared in March?
It was like early, I would say late April, early May.
Okay.
And they found that.
Okay. And was that name tag, where it was found, would that have been on the way from the bus to her dormitory, or would it have been in the opposite direction?
No, it was found pretty much right where the bus left off the passengers that night. It actually, that was a very mild winter. We did not have very much snow that winter, and anytime it rained, anytime we had any precipitation, it was always kind of freezing rain. But right after, and there was no snow on the ground when Susie disappeared. It was very clear, just, whatever.
Okay.
But that week after she disappeared, there was a small snowstorm. And I would say maybe 4 or 5 inches, not much. And when the college plowed that parking lot, it had salt and sand or whatever on the parking lot, and they pushed that up over the curb. There was like a curb where the bus left the passengers off.
Yes.
And when they pushed the salt and sand or whatever up to the top, it went up over the top of the curb, and it was there that that badge was found. Now, from what I gathered from the police, they said that right after she disappeared, of course, they didn't go out to look for about 3 or 4 days. But they said right after she disappeared, they walked that parking lot pretty much shoulder to shoulder and did not find anything. All right, this is where the confusion comes in. They found nothing. Now, I'm saying that where this badge was found was up on top of this pile of sand and salt or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, like I said, almost a month and a half to 2 months after she disappeared where they found it. And could somebody have come by and dropped it? I don't know. The other thing about this was this particular badge was one, according to the place where she worked, they were not using anymore. They were using a hang tag where you put it around your neck on a
lariat
type thing, and they had the badge on that. This one was a pin badge, and from what we found, the police showed us the back of the badge. The pin was very rusty. Well, I think you could put something out, in a day and have it rust.
Right,
pretty quickly.
Especially cheap metal like that, sure.
Yeah, cheap metal, so they were saying, well, it was here for a long while. Well, we can't decide that it was. It was cracked. I would say that, maybe a car drove over it or something, so it was cracked. But other than that, there wasn't really much else we could find out about that badge, other than it was found by 2 students who were walking through the parking lot, and they found it. And they first picked it up, thought it was a credit card, because the size of a credit card, and threw it down, and then the one girl picked it up and said, oh, there's a girl that's missing. Let's look at this. And they looked at it, and there was her name. So,
was it Suzanne's habit to, like, if she left work, would she have just left the name tag on, like, to go home? And
some people,
I mean,
what do you that all the time.
Okay, would you say that was her habit to do that probably too? Because some people, they're going to take it off. Well, I don't want somebody to know that I work at this store, or
well,
something.
The unusual thing about this, and there's people always say there's always something we're missing here along the way, but the unusual thing is the fact that she never liked to wear the clothes that she had to wear to work. Out of work. So she would bring a bag of clothes, and it was like tan-colored pants and a certain colored shirt. I can't remember what it was, but it was the logo of the company that she worked for. So she would bring them with her, change at work, then once she got done with work, she would change the clothes back and put them back in a bag and carry them home or carry them back to the dorm. So if she would do that, taking the badge off too.
Right.
So that's always been a question high on my list.
Yeah.
But I never got any good answers to that.
Do you have knowledge if she changed clothes that night? After she?
Oh yeah,
she did.
Oh, yeah.
She absolutely did. Okay.
She absolutely did. The man that she worked for, her boss at the time, said that Susie would come in a little bit early to work, so she could get into her work clothes, and always started a little bit early, which meant that she could leave 5 minutes before the bus would come. If she'd leave 5 or 10 minutes, before the bus would come, and change back into her outdoor clothes, basically jeans or whatever the kids were wearing at the time. And she would take those clothes off. She didn't want to wear those clothes out. I don't know why, but that was her habit.
Well, maybe a fashion, statement of some type, self-conscious about her fashion or something like that. I think I've known people I think I've had 1 or 2 jobs like that, in my life where it maybe has like the name of a store or something on there, and
like McDonald's or something. You don't want to wear your McDonald's uniform out, advertising the uniform.
Yeah, maybe not. But just going back to the name tag, so it's possible that night the name tag falls out. It sits there somewhere around the bus. She disappears. It sits there for a couple days. Nobody notices it. And then the storm comes. The snow gets pushed away. The name tag gets caught up in the snow. And then these months later, or 8 weeks later, the snow melts. And then the name tag appears.
It shows up.
That's possible.
That's possible.
Okay. Great. I just wanted to get that on the record. Okay, great. Let's move on once again. I guess back to the boyfriend. The next day he calls you and tells you that Suzanne has disappeared. Yeah,
he says, how did he word it? He worded it so that it didn't sound like, geez, Susie disappeared. What are we going to do about it? It wasn't like that. It says, did you know Susie didn't come home last night or something like that? And it was like a shock to me because I was getting ready. My husband was reading a newspaper. I was getting ready so that we could go to meet my son. It was going to take me out for my birthday, which was the day before Susie disappeared. And so he called, my son said, we'll go out for lunch. And so I was getting ready. The phone rings, and he says, did you know Susie didn't come back last night? It was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I was like a little bit in shock because, why didn't you call me last night? And why are you saying that? And so I gave the phone to my husband, and my husband got the information from him saying that, Susie didn't come back. He had tried to get into her computer, which he did. He got into her computer and, looked at different emails or whatever.
Right. We'll get into that. We'll get into that too. But we'll get into that. But he calls and says, and then you hang up the phone and you go to Albany.
My husband went right down to Albany. Yeah, I stayed here because I thought, if there were any phone calls, somebody would call me and I'd be here. That was before, cell phones were just coming in, so we didn't have the cell phone.
Yeah.
But, I here, and Doug went to Albany to, go and talk with the police because the police weren't taking any report from just a boyfriend, and, they were trying to convince us that, maybe she just came home and she went and stayed in somebody else's room, fell asleep, and, she'll show up again. Basically, they poo-pooing the whole thing. So,
let me ask you this, if you know. Did Suzanne and Rich have, I'll admit I'm single at 46, but I know most people who are in relationships or married, they have kind of like a schedule. They call people at certain times of the day, maybe after they get off of work or something like that.
Yes.
Would it have been Suzanne's inner habit maybe to call him when she got back to her dorm or something like that?
Yes, that was the habit, and that
Okay.
was basically the reason why he, he did not contact us right away. When she got back, she usually got back to her dorm about 9:45. She left work at 9:30 or 9:25 so that she could run to change her clothes and then catch the bus back to the campus. And the campus made no stops between the mall she worked at and where she got off at visitors parking lot, and it was about a 10-minute ride. And so she made, when she would get back to her dorm, which would have been about 9:45, she would make a phone call to him, or she would email him to let him know that she was back. And she didn't do it that night. And he started, according to her roommates, or their quad mates, because this is like a four-room quad that she lived in. And according to them, they hadn't heard her come in. She normally would come in, and she had a lot of keys on a key fob, and it would hit the door, and they could hear the noise when she walked in. And they never heard that. So, but all they heard all night long was the phone ringing. The phone kept ringing and ringing because he was trying to call.
So there is a record of at least somebody trying to call her on her phone that night, trying to reach her, figure out where she was. We don't know necessarily if it was him or not, but somebody was looking for her.
Somebody was looking for her.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, so the next day, don't quite know about the ATM situation yet, but you start this search, and does he take part in it?
I don't know what he actually, I think he might have tried, getting a hold of the police. I don't think he ever really went to the campus. My husband went to the campus, and he called around 9:30 in the morning, which, we're saying 12 hours after she was not heard from. So we've got 12 hours gone already, and so Doug goes down to the campus, and it takes him, got himself right down there, and he was down there by maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. And he went right to the police and, talked to them. In the meantime, I thought, what do I do while I'm sitting here? And I thought about her credit cards, and I thought maybe, because all her credit card statements would come to us. And she had maybe 2 credit cards. She didn't have a lot. But they would come here. Her bank, book, I knew what she had in her bank account because all the statements would come here. And so I started to call. I called because I knew she had an ATM account. So I called it. I think by the time I figured that all out, it was around, 2:30 or about maybe, 3:15, I'd say, that I got a hold of an ATM agent for her ATM card. And I was talking to this woman on the telephone. She was in Seattle, Washington. And I'm looking at the clock, and about 10 minutes to 4, she says to me, "I think that card just got used."
That had to have been a crazy moment for you. That had to have been a really surreal moment.
Was.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, where did it get used? And she said, I can't tell you that because this particular company was Cirrus, and Cirrus gets their receipts the next day. At that time, I don't know what they do now, but at that time, all the receipts for the day before would come into the company the next day. And she said, I can tell you tomorrow morning, but I can't tell you right now. And I said, well, can you tell me anything about it? And she said, the PIN number was a direct PIN number, direct hit on the PIN number.
So, and what that means is that somebody used the card and somebody got the PIN right the first time.
Right the first time.
Nobody tried to mess around, hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5. It was whatever it was, the first time, boom.
The first time it was the right PIN number.
Okay.
So I was, what else can you tell me? She said, I can't tell you anything else. So first thing the next morning, this woman, like I said, Seattle, Washington, she called me up and she told me that the receipts were turned in and $25 was taken out of the account.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it, which was kind of the usual thing that Susan, $20, I'm sorry. $20.
Okay.
Was the usual thing that she had taken out. And she had taken out the day before, the day she disappeared, at around, I would say, 4 o'clock or 3:30 or 4 o'clock, from a bank across from the campus, she had taken 20 out. And then she got to the mall where she worked and took 20 more out at the mall. So, maybe to buy supper, I don't know.
Now, I'm going to ask you this because, once again, this is going to become, for the listeners, this is going to become relevant later. Are you sure she used the card both those times? Definitely.
Yes, I believe that, yes, because at the time, there was a camera at the bank where she took the first 20 out. And when she got to the mall, I believe there was a camera in the mall at their ATM machine where she took the second 20 out. Okay, so they saw her there, and both times.
Okay.
So it was her. But when they got to the place where the card was used
on March 3rd.
On March the 3rd, well, I was on the telephone with the ATM person.
Mm-hmm.
The surveillance camera was not over the ATM machine.
Right.
It was over the counter where the cash register was for the store that the convenience store that she was used.
So the camera is, once again, for the listeners, what that means is that the camera was pointed at the registers, probably because the owner of the store might have wanted to make sure somebody wasn't ripping them off. In contrast to, like, today, almost 20 years later, where it seems like every convenience store has, 10 cameras all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. There was only the one camera over the cash register in that convenience store.
And where was the ATM in that store?
Just inside the doorway. So when somebody would come in, they could go right to the ATM machine, do their business, get money out, maybe go to the counter and buy what they wanted to buy and have the cash on hand.
Right.
That particular machine gave cash.
Okay.
Some machines give script, but that one I was told gave cash.
Right. And this, by the way, this is also how the guy with the Nike hat got involved, because he was in the store right around the time that ATM spit out the money.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's how that all ties itself up together.
And the reason that you saw the Nike hat was because the camera was overhead, so it was kind of a bird's eye view. So all you got was the hat with the brim and maybe a little part of this guy's nose. Really no facial, familiarity. You couldn't get, there was no face there. I mean, it was basically his.
But the police finally found him somehow.
Finally located him. He had a, what did he have? A jacket. He had, it was a winter jacket that was a particular brand, and that was another reason that he was identified with, because of the jacket, the hat. And it was months later when they finally identified him. It wasn't like overnight.
And that's...
it took a long time to find him, but they did find him.
They did find... That's why it's weird 18 years later that's the name of the make of the jacket.
The company of the jacket. Yeah.
Right. And but going back to, you said it took them a while, but still you'd think 18 years later that, some of these people would clean their information up. How did her boyfriend find out that she was missing? He called you, but how did he find out? Because
she didn't call him, so he tried calling her.
Okay.
And he kept calling her, claiming that that's what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think my husband asked him, well, why didn't you go down there? And he said he didn't really have an explanation. But when the police talked to him, his explanation was his alibi was he was playing a game on the computer with one of his friends. And his friend...
when she disappeared.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And this friend identified him by the fact that he said, I knew all his moves. In other words, the moves on this particular game. that he was playing.
How far, and we maybe need to clear this up too, how far did her boyfriend live from the Albany campus? He didn't go to school there, but he lived close.
Yes, he did. He lived maybe, I would say, if you got on the Northway, probably about 10 to 12 minutes away. Yep, not very far. Okay,
getting back to the question of how he found out. So he just took for granted that because she didn't pick up the phone, not even the next day, that she never came back? Or did finally somebody pick up the phone in that dorm? Or did he drive down there and find one of her roommates or something, and they said, no, Suzanne never came home last night?
No, he just decided that she was missing. That was what his... Okay. That's right. You know, just talking to you about this really brings a lot of this back, you know. I mean, these are questions that need to be asked from the police again. You know, we need to go over this and over this. Yeah. There's a clue somewhere.
Well, I ask the questions because either I don't know them or haven't read them, and I don't want this. I don't want you to. This is not a point of trying to relive this over again for you. You know, that's not why I do this. But
no,
I'm just asking questions as you're answering them. You know, just a thing that pops into my head. Once again, you can answer it. Great. If you don't know, that's fine too. You know, that's fine too. Now you did a show. Now we should say something before we continue. There is no suspect in this crime. There's a woman that I've interviewed, that's going to be on a future show. And she always likes to say, nobody's been included, nobody's been excluded in the disappearance of Suzanne Lau. Okay, that is a fact. All right, that's a fact. We have to establish that right now for the listeners. However, you did a show called Disappeared back in 2011, 2012, where you were very, let's put it this way, there was a strong feeling there that you thought that her boyfriend had something to do with it. Okay, now can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about it. You know, for a long time the police pretty much said don't say anything, you know. Well, you know, 18 years have gone by and I just got to the point where I just couldn't hold back anymore. But, you know, just the fact that here was a guy who claimed to be her boyfriend, lived about 10 to 12 minutes away from the campus, realized that she didn't come home that night, and didn't drive down to find out where she was. Most people would say, yes, you know, if it was my boyfriend or girlfriend, I'd want to know where they were, you know. I want to go check, you know. Yeah. Most guys would do that. And
now, do you think that he didn't? Now, this is once again another point that was, you know, that we've talked about, you know, when we've originally talked. Could it be the reason he didn't go down there is because maybe they weren't a couple anymore?
Well, I was wondering that also, but, you know, from the fact that he did call the next day to tell us, you know, that she didn't come back to her room, so they could have, maybe he still thought they were a couple. I thought around Valentine's Day that she gave him the Dear John letter, but we never knew for sure. You know, and that was only 2 weeks before she disappeared. And I know that every time she tried to break up with him, he would just get very emotional and throw a real fit about it. So, and she was the kind of a person who couldn't take that kind of emotion, you know, that she always felt sorry for, you know, the underdog, basically. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if he had her pretty much, you know, under his thumb.
Do you think that that is something that she would have explicitly told you? Hey, Ma, you know that I broke up with Rich last week. Do you think that was...
I knew there were times when she tried, you know, and she didn't actually tell him in person. She would write a long letter and then hand him the letter, and he would get home, open the letter, and about 10 minutes later you'd hear the telephone ring and you'd hear her on the phone, you know, arguing with him, and eventually, you know, they would get back together again.
So this was a relationship that had its ups and downs.
It sure did, yep.
Okay, okay. So once again, we just have to establish that he's been interviewed by the police, maybe not recently, but at the time, maybe a few months after, or whenever, he's been interviewed. He has seemingly a decent alibi with the video. Of course, nobody saw him
No.
But he's playing video games. This friend, whoever he is vouching for him. That alibi has never been broken.
No.
Okay. However, given that he is a computer expert, just like Suzanne was, maybe there's the possibility that he could have maybe programmed the computer to do something, because there are,
That's always been my contention, is that he programmed that computer to play that game, and was not not where he said he was. And right after Susie disappeared, and the police would want to talk to him and his family, they finally got a lawyer, very high-priced lawyer, and that was it. Police can't, unless you have, probable cause, you cannot bother the person anymore. So basically the victim has less rights than the perpetrator.
Yeah.
That sent up red flags for me.
Yeah. Let's move on to something else, and it has to do with, and this takes us to the ETM question again. That Rich and Suzanne had a favorite movie called Hackers.
That's
all right. And you told me about that the first time we talked. I've watched the movie. All right. I watched it from beginning to end, and I can tell you, I even took a few notes during it. Just to kind of run through my head after I was done watching it. It was kind of interesting seeing Angelina Jolie 21 years ago with she had this very boyish haircut, and it was very 90s, and being 25 at the time that the movie came out, it certainly brought back some memories. But there's a specific part in that movie that is relevant to this case. And it's almost like a weird coincidence, almost, if you believe in that sort of thing. In the movie, in the first quarter of the movie, the movie of Hackers is about these people, as you can imagine, young computer kids in high school, kind of like, I guess from my generation, would have been like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, going in and switching his grades. Well, these guys were doing a lot more than that in this movie. Right. And the one guy was bragging about getting into an ATM machine, hacking it, and causing it to spit out money somewhere. All right? And then here we have, just 3 years later, that movie came out in 95. In 98, you have Suzanne disappear, and the next day, that ATM in that store spits out that $20 bill. Right. And seemingly nobody saw anybody come in and use that machine. Now, granted, it wasn't caught on camera, but nobody remembers anybody using the machine.
Well, the police actually, when they realized the ATM machine might be, some factor, they were able to get about a half an hour before and a half an hour after that time frame, that 3:50, 10 minutes before, of all the people who used the machine, and they were able to speak with everybody. And that's how this Nike guy, the one they refer to as the Nike guy, was the only one that they could not identify right away. He was the only one, and that's why he became a suspect. And basically, he became a suspect because the boyfriend's family decided that he should be the suspect. And they were the ones who put up all the posters with his picture.
The boyfriend's family put those posters up.
Yeah, and they also bought a billboard with Susie on one side of the billboard and the Nike man on the other side. Can you identify this man? So that would throw any suspicions away from anybody else for a long time, and it did. That billboard was up for 6 months.
Now, it should also be noted, nobody saw Suzanne go in and use that machine that day. No.
And this was the other thing about that was it was about 2.5 miles from the campus. Susie wasn't much of a walker, and I don't think she would have walked down there. She did not drive. She didn't have a driver's license or a car, and in order to take a bus, it would have been out of her way to get a bus to that area. So I don't think Susie was there. I know she was.
Did you not also tell me the first time we talked that a branch of her bank is very close to there?
Right across the street.
So if she's going to go use if it was her that day, and maybe she had some sort of, let's just, some sort of, I don't know what, the medical term, but kind of just an amnesia or something like that. If she needed to use the ATM and could look at this card and say, well, I have this ATM, and maybe she knows the number, she would have gone to the bank, not to the...
She would have gone across the street, yeah.
Right.
Susie was smart enough not to spend any extra money if she didn't. And she had talked to me, actually, on my birthday, which was March the 1st, and she said how she was low on money, and if, I said, well, do you want me to send you some? Because I could have put some money in her bank account, because I had access to her bank account. And she said, no, she could wait till Thursday of that week, because that was the day she was going to get paid, and she still had enough, cash left in the ATM that she could take cash anytime she needed it. So, and also the other thing was, after she disappeared, there was a little jar full of money on her desk, full of change. So it was like, not a lot, maybe $8 or $9 in change that she used for the washing machine and probably for, candy machine or whatever. So, it wasn't like she was completely broke.
Yeah.
So, why would she go all the way down to this convenience store, about 2.5 miles from her campus when she had stores all around? And, across the street from the campus, there was an ATM machine in a bank that was her bank. So, I don't think that was her that did that.
I'll ask you this. Does the boyfriend have an alibi for where he was when the ATM was used? We know he has an alibi for the night before.
He claimed he was out looking for her.
Okay.
But we don't know.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Let's move on to something else. And once again, we're going to have to say for the record that nobody has been included or excluded from this investigation. Okay, that's why it's still unsolved 18 years later.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about, I know we had a wide-ranging interview the first time we talked, but I want to just keep it to this. The boyfriend's father assisted in the search for Suzanne. Okay? But what happened?
I don't remember saying that he did.
Well, I guess I'm trying to put this lightly. He started calling in, having sightings of Suzanne.
Oh yeah. He actually.
Can we talk about that? Do you feel comfortable talking?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He actually he would tell the police, how he was. I think at one time he was like an auxiliary policeman, whatever that means, in this little town or whatever. Big deal,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were waiting in a room at the campus, and one of the things that he said out loud was to his son, if you think you've met the police, regular police, wait till you meet the state police. In other words, they're the big guys, they're the ones that are going to really take over. So he was really kind of almost enamored with police-type people. So several weeks after Susie disappeared, he called the state police to say he said, I know what happened to Suzanne. I was driving down the road, and I saw a car that looked just like my son's car. Same color, same stickers on the car. Everything was exactly the same. He said, so I pulled up alongside so I could wave, and the guy that looked at me looked just like my son, but it wasn't my son. So he figured that night this guy must have gone to the campus, this fictitious guy.
Okay.
And Susie, when she got off he knew when she got off the bus and, called her over, and she thought it was my son, and she got in the car with him. So that was his first story.
Okay.
Another story that he continued
Now, just for the record, how do you know that happened? Just the police told you that?
Oh, yeah, the police told me.
And there are police records in the state of New York right now that happened. Just once again, for the record, for the listeners.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, please continue. Okay, go ahead.
The other thing was he was a truck driver himself at the time, and he drove his truck to a small town about 25, 30 miles away from here called Amsterdam, Gloversville, Amsterdam area. And he said he would stop at this coffee shop every day that he drives the truck there. And he said, I'd see Suzanne sitting out on a bench just outside this coffee shop, which kind of threw me for a loop there, because how in the heck would she get there? But anyway, he would see her sitting on the bench. So he told the police this. He said, I saw her at least 8 times. And so the police said, look, I'm going to give you one of our telephones. The next time you see her on that bench, you call us. We'll have a policeman there in 2 minutes. And so, 2 weeks went by, and they actually had some undercover police following him around. And they saw he got on the telephone, and he called, and he said, she's out there sitting on the bench right now. And the other 2 police are saying, what's he talking about?
And the 2 cops are right there as well in an unmarked car, seeing what the father's saying, and they're seeing nothing.
Nothing. They saw nothing. So that was another sighting, debacle.
I'm going to guess that the calls probably stopped shortly after those sightings stopped shortly after that.
But he had one more where there's a college here in Schenectady. It's called Union College. And he claimed he was driving, it was like, I don't know, it was May or June, very hot day. And he said, I saw Susie in her long winter coat and boots walking through that campus in Union College. That particular day, he called the police to tell him that. Is he crazy? I don't know, but that was another one that,
Did you get to know him very well while Suzanne and Rich dated? Did you get to know him?
I didn't really get to know him very well. Susie did. I know she, they were going out and they would see each other every weekend. Mm-hmm. And that was the one thing that was kind of unusual was the mother claimed that the father didn't know Susie very well. And I said, I got upset with her, and I said, how can you say that? She saw him every weekend that they dated. Mm-hmm. And there were times when, he would come out and try to, help his son fix the car, and the 2 of them were there. I said, she knew that. And then when we brought Susie down to Oneonta, he showed up with some carpets and things that Susie had stored, in a storage locker. The father, the mother, and the son all showed up at Oneonta. So it wasn't like he didn't know her. He knew her. So I don't know.
What you're saying is that the family of her boyfriend were helpful at times. I mean, they showed up and brought some things and.
Not that we asked them to, and I remember when they showed up at Oneonta, I said, I remember, we were going to take Susie out to eat after, and I remember seeing them show up, and I said to her right away, I said, there's no way they're going out to eat with us. You know that already, don't you? And she was, yes, I do. Okay. I said, okay, because I didn't care for any of them. And that was long before she disappeared. I didn't like them.
But just to be clear, for the record, what you're saying here is on the record, New York State police or local police stuff, these things that he did that turned out to be false sightings.
Yeah.
All right? Okay. This is not some, sour grapes or anything like that. Once again, I know you're telling the truth, but I just want to hear, I want to make sure my listeners understand that. Okay?
Right.
That's all I'm trying to do with this. Okay. Because as long as there is a record of that happening, then then that's factual to me. What do you think happened to your daughter?
I really wish I could look at a magic ball and say, I know exactly what happened to her. I really don't know. I know that she made it back to the campus that night. She was witnessed by a girl who was getting on the bus that saw her getting off the bus. And so I know she made it to the campus. From then on, I really don't know. My feeling is that her boyfriend or some member of his family came to the campus, and she knew them, and she would get in the car with any of those people, and something bad happened. I really don't know.
You know, the theme of this show, and I can't thank you enough, and we're going to continue on with some other things. We're going to move on to what you've been doing since. But this show, the theme of it is about transitional areas, about safety, being aware of your surroundings and things like that, because that was what really struck me about your daughter's case. And I told you from the beginning, this is still a case I think that can be solved. I think, with the right, sleuthing, investigation, cold case work, or whatever else. But with each of these shows, I try to teach the listeners about something. And I do think about women out there today, 2016, who, have their heads in their phones, and they set themselves up for being abducted, being attacked, being raped, and becoming a missing person. I don't think that's what happened in your daughter's case, okay? But she was in one of those transitional areas, moving from the bus to her dorm. Those are the places, those transitional areas. You'll see a lot of self-defense experts talk about that. So for any of you women out there listening, this is the stuff you really have to be aware of. I don't care if it's on a college campus, places that you're familiar with. If somebody has their eye on you and you're not paying attention to your surroundings, you could be, setting yourself up. Now let's move on to what's been going on since. Talk to me about Suzanne's Law.
Okay. There are actually, I have two laws.
Please, tell us about them.
Yeah. Suzanne's Law, the first law that we passed was in it was called the New York State College Safety Act of 1999, and it actually became law in 2000. And it was an act to amend the education law in relation to requiring colleges and universities to implement plans for the investigation of violent felonies and reports of missing students occurring on their campuses. Basically, they wanted the police to actually have some sort of a plan in place so that if a kid went missing on a college campus, or if there was anything violent like rape or whatever, they were able to have a plan so that all police agencies would get involved in this. And that became a New York State law in 2000. And then in 2008, it became a federal law, and it's called the Suzanne Lyles Campus Safety Act. Is a federal law now, and that was 2008 when that one was passed. In 2003, we had been working to try to get Suzanne listed with the National Center for Missing Children, but the National Center for Missing Children did not take children after the age of 18, up to the age of, they would only take them up to the age of their 18th birthday. So once you became 18, that was it. And we felt that students that, are in college or, graduate and up to the age of 21, they're kind of vulnerable. That's a whole vulnerable group.
Yes. And
we worked very hard to get a law passed. And in 2003, that law became Suzanne's Law. And it requires it requires police to notify the National Crime Information Center when someone between the ages of 18 and 21 is reported missing, as a part of the National Amber Alert Bill. And so now what that law did is it actually raised the age from 18 to your 21st birthday. And now once the police make the call, they can call the National Center for Missing Children and get those children listed with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Right.
And the beauty of this law is that people who went missing before this law went into place, before 2003, can be grandfathered into the system. So I have one lady that I can put my finger on right away. Her son went missing. He was 20. He was at the Columbia University, and he went missing in 1972. And this woman never had any areas to look or search or any help or anything like that. And we got him listed with the National Center for Missing Children. So this man now is in his 60s, but he's still listed on their webpage as a missing person because he went missing at 20. So that's the beauty of this law. So I really feel that Suzanne's law put a lot of young people who never would have had any help or the families any help with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
What was that process like? I mean, you've become an advocate now, and then getting involved with the politics, getting a law passed. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was it was interesting because when the first law passed in New York State, and I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty easy. I didn't know you could pass laws that easily. And people would say to me, how did you get this thing passed? I don't know if it was because she was an attractive college student that went missing that, the law passed right away or what. But then we found out that we really had to, become a non-for-profit organization in order to really have some, fight behind us, basically. So we became a non-for-profit organization to help other people with missing family members. And once we did that, it seemed very easy to talk to representatives or, federal representatives to see if we could pass another law or to even, get our campus safety law was 2008. And at the time, she now is New York State Senator, federal senator, but her name was Kristen Gillibrand, and she was a representative. Mm-hmm. And at that time, she hadn't passed a law yet. So we went to see her, and guess what? She worked hard with Charles Schumer, Senator Schumer, and the two of them passed the Suzanne Lyle Campus Safety Act in 2008.
That had to feel like quite an accomplishment for you.
It was a big accomplishment, and it was a big accomplishment for her, too. And the one that passed in 2003 was another one that we actually spoke with a representative, and he said he filibustered all night, and then the next morning he called us to say we passed the law. I said, wow, that's great. Mm-hmm. So it was, we said, I can't believe this happened. People would say to us, how do you get those things going? I don't know. It just worked. We hit the right people at the right time.
Yeah, you're not. These people aren't going to drop through the cracks anymore. No,
that's the way I look at it. And anytime I get a phone call from a family member that says, their child 18 to 21 has gone missing, I immediately get them hooked up with Suzanne's law and, to get a hold of the National Center for Missing Children. You have to have your police agency call, but it's a federal law. They have to do it now. And that helps them because, they can request posters if they need, posters. They can request investigators that are retired that will look at your case. They'll get a lot of help that they wouldn't have gotten had they, were not able to get into the National Center for Missing Children. if it's a child under the age of 18, they'll take them right away. But anybody over that age is 18 to 21, it's a little sticky.
Yeah, probably because a lot of those kids, they now have their independence. Some of them do leave the house on their own. They disappear on their own. In fact, probably if there was some study done, I'm sure you'd find that 18 to 21 age range is probably being most likely to just say, heck, I'm out of here, and it not technically be a disappearance. It's just somebody moving from New York to California.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you find families that have lost touch with these children, and then all of a sudden they say, wow, I haven't talked to so-and-so for a long time. What's happened to them? And then find out that they're no longer around, or they got caught up with, some bad situation that, they can't get out of, which is what happens to a lot of those young people.
I want to ask you a question. If you have some insight into it, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear you talk about it. You've turned Suzanne's disappearance into 2 laws. It's quite an accomplishment. We know of other parents, family members, for example, Kelly Murphy, Project Jason, who turned her son's disappearance into something very positive as well. On the other hand, I know, because I've taken interest in disappearances for years now, that there are many parents and family members who kind of go the opposite direction. That I, for example, can't even begin to tell you how many websites that are supposed to feature a missing person or something like that. You go to the website and the link doesn't even work anymore.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight into that? Why some people choose to go one direction and then it seems like other people go the other?
Well, there's some people that are real advocates, like Kelly, for example,
right.
Project Jason. When Kelly's son disappeared, there was nothing out there in Nebraska, where she was from, that was helping her, and she located us on a web page and called us and said, "Is it okay if I come out to see what you're doing?" And she made the trip about 2 or 3 times in a row, came every year to our Missing Persons Day, and then eventually Kelly decided to go out on her own and become her own advocate. Yeah. I know many other families who have, chosen to become advocates for the missing because their child went missing. And, maybe the time for us, 18 years ago, there really wasn't a lot out there for us.
Yeah, that's true.
We just... we didn't know where to turn. We didn't know what to do. Maybe we were doing all the wrong things, but we didn't know, and we had nobody to ask. And so we just decided that we would become advocates for this. My husband was a counselor, and, he kind of knew that, helping people was the way to go. And we decided to turn our tragedy into something that would help other people so they wouldn't get so far down as we got in the beginning, just turn it around.
Do you think, though, that is the reason, some people, it hurts so much to think about it that, after a while, they just kind of want to move away from it, even if it is a son or daughter? Because I'm telling you, as a person, and of course, I don't have any children, but I hope that never happens to me with, my parents or, a family member. I don't wish that upon anybody.
No.
But so I'm not going to say I know how you feel. I don't.
No, but there's a lot of people who, and I think it's the same way as going to a funeral or a wake, and you go and you say you don't know what to say. So you say, oh, yeah, I know how you feel. But what happens with a lot of people is they want to tell you to move on, stop dwelling on it, get past it, you're not going to be able to do. Well, I don't care if that person eventually comes back being alive or deceased. It doesn't matter if it happens. The family is always going to have that hole in their heart. There's a hole there, and it never heals up. Yeah. And I think that's the bottom line, is that sometimes some people have such a deep hole, they wind up getting divorced. They can't cope with each other anymore. Yeah. They have health issues. They have drinking problems, drug problems, because that's the only way that takes the pain away for them. And, you know, I don't like to hear that, but I do hear that a lot.
Yeah,
I hear that a lot. Families that just haven't been able to cope. I mean, they're strong for a while, but then they just lose it after a while. They don't think that there's any more hope. I mean, that's the reason why we, started our organization.
And the name of your organization, please.
It's called the Center for Hope, and hope meaning healing our painful emotions. How do you come up with something to add to that? But that's what it is. It's really painful. It's the worst pain that you can experience. Every little thing around you reminds you of that person that's disappeared, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, and then there's no closure. Well, I don't even like that word, closure, resolve in any of these cases, because when a person dies, they have a place to go to grieve that person. There's always a gravesite or something. But with a missing person, they have nothing, which is why we have Missing Persons Day once a year. And in New York State, we have a monument for missing people.
And where is it? Where is it?
It's right in downtown Albany, right next to the New York State Museum.
Okay.
It's 20 feet high. It has a perpetual flame at the top. And around the base, which is 8 foot by 8 foot granite base, it says, as a symbol of our eternal hope, may this flame light their way home. And I have to tell you, there have been many times when I've been down there to that monument where there's a poster there, a stuffed animal, flowers. People go there and sit and grieve. Yeah. They have a place to actually feel that missing person. There have been candlelight vigils at that monument because people, have somebody who's missing, and it's the place they want to go and have a vigil, just because they're hoping that kind of publicity will bring that person back.
Yeah. Now, Suzanne, she had at least one other sibling, right? You have a son?
I have a son and a daughter.
And how did that affect them? I mean, what? It
was very difficult for them, although they were grown up. Susie was our youngest child. My son was 12, going on 13 when she was born. My daughter was almost 9, going on 10. And so, they were kind of like second parents to them. My son adored her. He'd take her to the concerts when she got to be her, right age.
Yeah, your daughter, Suzanne, was a Rush fan.
She was a Rush fan.
I like Rush myself. Yeah.
And she had about 23 CDs.
Wow.
Of Rush before she disappeared, which I was amazed because she was really into Rush.
She had really good musical taste.
Whenever Rush came to, our local area here in Saratoga, SPAC, my son would take her. He didn't want her going to concerts by herself. So he would take her. Just to tell you the age difference, when he went to his first year of college, she was going into first grade.
Wow.
To give you.
Yeah, well, you should know, I don't know if I told you that the first time we talked, but I have 2 brothers and a sister who are quite a bit older than I am as well. I actually have a sister my brothers and my sister are all almost 20 years older than I am. So
there you go.
I know, yeah. So was the baby.
Kid.
Yeah.
Yep, the baby, and everybody treated her,
Yes.
kind of that way, and, it was hard for them. They were a little bit older, but I'll tell you, when I talk to families who have a child that's gone missing, and I'm saying child because everybody is somebody's child. I don't care who it is. And, if you're 55 years old and you go missing, you were somebody's child at one point. But anybody who has a child that has gone missing and has young siblings, I usually tell those families, please, do something with them, even if it's to take them out for an ice cream cone or something. don't let them feel neglected, because you become so focused in trying to find the missing person that you forget about the siblings. And I have heard stories about siblings who have, I know of one who committed suicide after how many years of the family being so focused in trying to find the young sibling that she couldn't cope anymore. She just couldn't handle it anymore. So it's very difficult for them. They don't say anything, but they do feel neglected.
Yeah.
So.
Well, to wrap this up, what else should be covered here? Where can people reach you, my listeners? You have a nonprofit organization. Do you take donations?
Yes.
What else do you want to talk about?
Well, we can be reached at it's called the Center for Hope. We're in upstate New York. We're 20 Prospect Street, Ballston Spa, New York, 12020. I do have a web page, which is Hope, the number 4, themissing.org.
Okay, Hope for the Missing with a 4 as the numeral 4.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. .org, and I can be reached by telephone, which is also on our webpage, but I'll give you the number. It's 518-884-8761.
Okay, great.
And those telephone calls that come into the office, we take them as they come in, because I get about maybe 30 or 40 a week. Missing people, so I have to take them as they come in.
Can I ask you, are you working on any legislation or anything right now? Do you think that's behind you, or you think you are going to do something even more regarding politics?
I think I would like to, look at some other things. We haven't, actually one of the things that we did do, we kind of got out of the legislation area for a while, and we produced decks of playing cards with 52 missing person cases on the cards, one on each card. The cards were passed out throughout New York State to the different jails. And I think we've had over 30,000 cards out there, 30,000 decks of cards. We also produced coasters that were sent out to the different bars and restaurants in the Capital District, and we picked out people who were missing through the Capital District for our coasters, hoping that if somebody had a drink and, loosened up a little bit, on the back of the card, there's a place where they can either text or scan and, make a phone call to a, place. So, we got out of doing some legislation because we were involved in the cards and the coasters. But there are other things that need to be, resolved, and we,
There's still holes. There's still holes in the laws that you'd like to see closed.
Oh yeah, there's lots of holes, and like I said, I think from the time Susie disappeared to now, so much has happened for the older group of students, the older group of people that, through our laws. I often get a phone call from an organization saying, if it wasn't for Susie M's law, this lady or this person would not have been able to get their child listed with the National Center, and, an Amber Alert wasn't, sent out or whatever. So, it does make me proud. And unfortunately, my husband is no longer with us. He passed away last year, and so it's a little harder for me to do things, but I'm still trying. I'm still working at it, and I will until I find my daughter.
Okay. Mary, I can tell you, I'm going to be praying for you. I hope that my listeners, I hope my listeners are praying for you, if that's their belief system. And I know we're all going to do what we can to try to get this resolved for you. We're not going to say closure, but we're going to say resolved.
Okay. Yes, that's the word you want to use. You do never want to use closure with a family with a missing person, because there's never any closure if you think about it. It's not the same as when a person dies from a disease or natural death.
Right.
That's closure.
Right.
It's not.
Mary, I've deeply enjoyed this interview, and I can't thank you enough for spending this time with me.
Well, I thank you also for even interviewing me. That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And that was my August 22nd, 2016 interview, and yes, I know the exact date. That was the interview with Mary Lyle, mother of Susie Lyle. I thank her for that interview, and I thank her even more for all the support she has shown over the entire 7 years of Unfound's existence. Here are some of the disappearances Unfound has gotten to cover with Mary's assistance. Peggy and Patty McDaniel, Craig Freer, Nicholas Masucci, Brian Sullivan, Dominique Holly Grisham, and Audrey Herron. Now, before I reflect on some of the biggest Unfound moments, let's do this. Unfound News. I hope you will keep an unfound listener and his family in your thoughts and prayers. He, his wife, and 2 children were in a horrific car accident within the past 2 weeks. They will all recover eventually. However, Peter, and that is the listener's name, had his pelvis broken in 5 places. So it's going to be a long road back. Next, I've scheduled an upcoming school appearance. I will be at Florida Southern College in Lakeland on September 20th. I'll be doing my presentation where I give the students the basics on disappearances. Finally, remember the date and time of September 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's when Dr. Telesco and I start up our shows for the fall again. We'll be discussing the murder of Tyler North. Okay then, what are some of the big moments from the first 7 years of Unfound? I will list these in chronological order from 2016 to the present. And yes, if you have additions to the list or if you'd like to argue with me about the list, please let me know by messaging me on social media or emailing me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. One thing before I get started, of course, resolutions to disappearances are always at the top of the list. So nothing that I'm going to name in this list has anything to do with resolutions. Those are always at the top. Those are just accepted. What I'm going to list here is everything else. How I'm going to do this is very much how the update episode is done, where I just have a few notes in front of me, and then everything else I'm going to have to do off the top of my head because, once again, to type this all out would take hours and hours and hours, and I just don't have time for that. So I just have what I think are the main moments in Unfound's history, and then I will expound on them off the top of my head. So please bear with some pauses, ers, and ums, and things like that. First big moment in Unfound's history, other than, of course, the first episode, was the discussion group getting started somewhere in October or November of 2016. I started the podcast without any social media presence at all, believe it or not. And it wasn't even myself who came up with the idea for the discussion group that still exists to this day on Facebook with almost 9,000 members. It was a listener, Jeremiah, who I still remember the message. He contacted me and says, I'd really like to start a group for Unfound listeners on Facebook. Can I do that? I said, yeah, Jeremiah, sure, spectacular. In fact, I'm sure, and he and I still talk to this day. I'm sure if we went way, way, way back into our messenger history, we would find that original conversation. But he approached me about starting a discussion group. And like I said, Unfound had no presence at all, anywhere. And I thought, sure, that does seem like a great idea. Good thinking, Jeremiah. And I can remember when there were only like 62 members in there, and now there are almost 9,000. It's crazy. But that was like the first big moment. Why? Of course, because it was Unfound's first entry, first step into social media. Next big moment, and to remind you, this is going in chronological order. So we're kind of moving up here to March, April of 2017. So discussion group, late 2016, and now we're into the spring of 2017. I would have to say is the episode on Peggy and Patty McDaniel. If you can believe it, when I first heard about their disappearances from Mary Lyle, if you were to have done a search for Peggy and Patty online, now remember their disappearances occurred in 1979, you would have only been able to find one of their pictures. They weren't even listed on the Charlie Project. They might have been on NamUs, but they weren't listed on the Charlie Project. Now, if you did a Google search, you only find pictures for one of them. But after that coverage, and because a listener, her name is Ray Lynn, really took an interest in this. How could two sisters go missing, and everybody forgot about them? And of course, their disappearances are connected to a murder. By the time December of 2017 occurred, when Florida had its Missing Persons Day, these two girls went from hardly anybody remembering that they even existed to both of them being honored at Florida's Missing Persons Day, along with their mother, Joyce Rovatuzo, who's now become a very good friend of mine, her being recognized as well at Florida's Missing Person Day just 8 months later. It was a combination, of course, of Mary Lyle telling me about these two sisters who are missing together and then being told it's connected to a murder, which completely blew my mind. It still blows my mind. And then a listener taking a deep interest. It's like exactly what I hope to happen on every disappearance that Unfound covers. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. But with this one, it certainly did. And we took the disappearances of two girls from obscurity and made them very, very prominent, to the point that they're, as you know from a couple months ago, and you've heard from the update episode, when they find cars now here in Florida, people are now automatically thinking about Peggy and Patty McDaniel. It's just, it was, of course, they're still missing, and that's very sad. But this is the kind of stuff that I'm looking to do with this podcast. And so that was the first instance of that kind of thing happening. And so it's a huge moment in Unfound's existence. That's why it's getting listed here, really putting Peggy and Patty McDaniel's disappearances on the map, going from obscurity to maybe being one of now the better known, more well-known disappearances in Florida. It's really incredible. Next big moment, and this is kind of all put together, but it started here in about May of 2017, and that would be my assistants, starting with Emily, who is still with me today. In fact, I was messaging with her earlier today. I'm recording this on August 29th of 2023 as Hurricane Idalia is out there in the Gulf. But I just spoke with Emily earlier today. But this started a trend that Emily approached me after being turned down by another podcaster whose name will not be mentioned. Emily wanted to help out, and I said, I'll absolutely take the help. And from there, it was just she and I for a while. And then Cherie and Carrie and Heather and Eric and Natasha. And now we have Kim and Misty. But that all got started in May of 2017 with Emily. And it's been a really big deal. It really has. It affords me the opportunity to kind of sit back on some things and allow them to do things. Of course, like, for example, Cherie moderates the live show on Monday nights to make sure we don't have any trolls in there, but she's become a very close friend of mine, a confidant regarding just the overall picture of Unfound, and the rest of them all have vital roles. But it all started there in May of 2017 with Emily just messaging me out of nowhere. And you should know, to this point, I've still never met Emily in person. And the only two assistants that I've ever met in person are Eric and Heather. All the other ones, I just know them over the internet. But I feel like I know them really well, and I hope they feel the same way about me. So that's a big moment. The first assistant then leading to all of the other people who are volunteers who help this podcast out. Next big moment, the live show. Kind of got YouTube started around the same time that the live show started, but you may remember, for all of you who go way, way, way back to the beginning, that the live show started on Facebook, and it was on Tuesdays. And then it was on Facebook, but I moved it to Wednesdays. And then it got totally moved to YouTube, I think maybe at the beginning of 2020, or maybe not. But it all started in October, November of 2017. So a year after, it took me a year to figure out that, yeah, maybe I should be doing something on YouTube as well, or Facebook, doing a live show if I had the time. So the discussion group, the fall of 2016, and then a full year later, I finally decided to add another social media outlet with the live show. But the live show has been spectacular. I love talking to all of you who have made the time. Now that it's on Monday nights on YouTube, and we use StreamYard, it's on Facebook and YouTube together now. It's amazing all the ways it's moved around. And gotten to know many of you. I see people in there who never miss it, who have never, I don't know if they've ever missed a live show, no matter what day or what medium or platform it was on. So it's been a big deal. It gives me a chance to talk about stuff that would not make it onto the podcast, get to reveal a little bit about my life outside of Unfound that I think people enjoy hearing, and they love asking me questions. And it's been a great time. Still gets about the same amount of views. We're working on that now that we're using StreamYard. But I really believe that one of the reasons that Unfound has been successful is because, yes, I know all those podcasts, everybody go to CrimeCon and they get to meet a lot of you in person, but that's once a year. Whereas I'd like to think that we're all getting together. All of you have an opportunity to get together with me once a week. So the live show, a big moment, the creation of it, and it continues to run. I guess we're coming up on 6 years later this fall. Big moment in Unfound's history when I started doing that. Next big moment, and this would cover all of 2018, and that would be working with the Tribune Review in Pittsburgh. And it wasn't even my idea. It was the woman who runs Trib Total Media. Her name is Jennifer Bertetto, and we went to high school together. Although we weren't in the same class, I think she was, let's just say she was behind me in years. I don't want to give away her age or anything with, I don't want to get into that. But she was not my class. She's younger than I am. And she approached me about doing something. She knew I was doing the podcast. She's always had an interest in disappearances herself. And so for the entire year of 2018, once a month, with my help, they featured disappearances in the Pittsburgh area. So western, really mostly southwestern Pennsylvania, although we might have done one kind of in northern West Virginia there too. So that was a big deal. With a podcast being able to be linked with a very professional, very well-known, very high-profile media outlet like the Trib, it was a huge deal. And Although I have to admit, maybe it didn't go exactly as I envisioned, but we got it done. I thought it went smoothly for that year. And in fact, a couple of those disappearances eventually ended up becoming regular Unfound podcast episodes eventually in 2019, 2020. But it all started there working with the Trib. So that whole 12 months of working with the Trib was certainly a huge moment in Unfound's existence. Staying in the year 2018, maybe some of you, given that I'm doing this chronologically, you maybe know what's going to be next. But the disappearance of Tom Brown. We, of course, know that he was eventually found. But the coverage of his disappearance, I look back at that and I still never could have predicted the way it would go. I still insist that I covered his disappearance like everyone before it, like everyone since. There was just something about it. Was it because of who Tom was? Is it because of the video? I suppose there are a lot of different reasons, but it became a phenomenon. And I still remember the first time I was messaged. It was not his mother, Penny, who messaged me. It was somebody who knew her. A woman asked me, have you heard about this disappearance of Tom Brown that occurred the day before Thanksgiving in 2016? So around that time, this must have been around April of 2018 when she messaged me. So a year and 4 or 5 months after he went missing is when I was first contacted. And then it ended up being an episode in the summer, like June of 2018. And I never could have guessed how much that coverage would put. Tom Brown's disappearance kind of went from a very small northern Texas regional thing to then an entire Texas thing. And now, of course, it's a national thing. And I know that Unfound gained a lot of listeners, a lot of people joining the discussion group, and because of that. But once again, I insist, I did nothing different on his disappearance, on his episode, that I haven't done on any other, just giving it 100%. But that was a big deal. And it continues to be a big deal. I'm not going to get into everything that's happened since. But certainly, and you know, it's one of those things you kind of know it right away. This was not something that it occurred to me like 6 months down the road. As soon as it was out there, and if you'll remember, I got interviewed on that radio station by that radio host. It was right away. And then it kind of just continued and had this kind of momentum. So that was a huge deal in Unfound's existence. I could not talk about Unfound and all the work that's been done here without talking about that episode. To finish off 2018, I can't talk about the history of Unfound without talking, of course, about my mother's death. She died on November 28th of 2018. And if you're looking at Unfound's history as to where that falls, she died after the disappearance, the coverage of the disappearance of Robert Wayne Cox. And the first disappearance, the episode that came out after my mother's disappearance, was the disappearance of Lucas Degerness from Canada. As with any death of someone you love very much, it has a profound effect on you. And for me, there was no bigger fan of Unfound than my mother. And she was extremely proud of the work that I was doing, how I was going about it, trying to help these people whose lives have been devastated. And she took a deep interest in it. She would watch the YouTube live show. She had all the books, and she'd ask me about the disappearances and all of these things. So it had a profound effect on me, and it, of course, still has a profound effect on me to this day. We're coming up on 5 years since her death in November. And as I've told everybody, I continue to do Unfound with the memory of my mother at the forefront. That there was no doubt that when she passed away, that she knew that I was doing something that I meant to do. She was very proud of it. I'm sure, maybe, before Unfound came along, she probably thought I would have made some different choices with what I'm doing with my life, dare I say. But once I started doing this podcast, I think that kind of attitude of hers changed. I guess this was something she finally approved of or something. But that it was a big moment in Unfound's existence. And why? How couldn't it be, right? So there you go. That another big moment in Unfound's history. So now we're moving into 2019, and I think another big moment, and it continues to be a big moment every Sunday evening, is the Think Tank. It's the only one of its kind, where a bunch of people get together to talk about a disappearance in depth, very small group, very private, everybody's opinions equal. I run this forum. I'm the ringleader. I, of course, set the agenda. I get to voice my opinions as well, of course, but I get to play a little bit of devil's advocate as we go from one question to the next, what I call points to ponder. And it is amazing that how many people have gotten involved in it and continue to love it. Of course, you have to be a Patreon member at the highest level, $12 or $20 a month through Patreon, but it's become a little club, a little bit like a combination, I guess, fraternity, sorority. You should know, for a long time, it was me and the rest of the people in there were women. But within like the 6 months, we have a couple guys who now regularly show up as Patreon supporters. You know who you are, Marty and Rockford. And so it's kind of like a combination for fraternity, sorority now. But we're always looking for new members. And it's just not, people getting around to gab. What I do with the information there is that I can then go back to the guest and say, I had this think tank, and here were some of the ideas that came out of it. So this was a big moment. I have to tell you, it wasn't even my idea, as some of these things aren't. It was actually my assistant, good friend Cherie's idea. I'm the person who named it. I'm the one who gave it the name, the think tank. But she was the one who came up with the idea of having this forum. And it's been good. We get together at 7 p.m. Eastern on Sunday evenings. That gives these people plenty of time to have listened to the episode that came out the previous Friday or 2 days before. And we talk maybe for about an hour and 15 minutes. And whereas in the episodes, there's no theorizing, and in fact, you know how kind of not 100% strict, maybe 95% strict I am on that in episodes and with the guests, but it's the exact opposite in the think tank. We let it fly. So if you'd like to be a member, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. The creation of that, a huge moment in Unfound's existence. Next big moment, and just like with the Trib for all of 2018, this is something that went on during the entire year of 2019, and that was my own work behind the scenes for the disappearance of Cameron Remmer. I was assisted by Cherie and my other assistant, Eric, who also did some work here on this, but it was kind of, dare I say, a little bit of an experiment on my part. I thought that I needed to be able to identify with the guests, these guests who are doing this work on their own. How you go about trying to dig up information years after the disappearance has occurred. And so I took it upon myself. I met Cameron's mother, not in person, but over the phone. Cameron's mother early in 2019. And I said, you know what? I'm going to work on this. You give me these names. And the good part about his disappearance is they had a ton of information. His family did a ton of work. The phone records, for example, are some of the most complete and very technical, in-depth that I've ever seen, even to this day. And so they had a lot of notes, and they sent it all to me. And so I just went about doing it behind the scenes on my own for the entire year of 2019. I went back and spoke and tracked down some of these people who actually had encountered Cameron that night at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. The bellhop, this guy who ran like a restaurant or a club inside the hotel. I tracked these people down and talked to them. I talked to this woman that young woman that Cameron had encountered at one point there as well, talking to all of them. And then even to the point where I was, with the help of a security guy who didn't work there anymore, I was able to track him down. He doesn't even live in California, I don't think, anymore, but I was able to track him down, and he was actually able to give me the name of the two security guards who were on duty that night when this all happened with Cameron. And as was detailed in the Cameron Remmer episode that came out at the end of 2019, those two guys did not like being contacted at all. To the point that the one that I reached out to ended up sending Cameron's mother a message telling me that I'm a kook, I'm making stuff up, that she should distance herself from me. And my assistant, Cherie, contacted the other security guard, and he didn't want to talk to her either. And this was a revelation regarding this, I think, for Cameron's family. So this was an entire thing. What does it take if you are a private person, you don't have the power of the state for subpoenas and warrants and everything else? What is it like to do something like this? Well, now I know. And I can speak from a point of, I did this myself, and here's some of the things that I ran into, problems and everything. I can now convey that to my guests when I give them advice. So, and then, of course, the Cameron Remmer episode came out at the end of 2019, and I think it still sets the record for the longest episode in Unfound's existence, I think. So, all that during 2019, a huge moment in Unfound's existence. And if you're asking me, do I think that those security guards could have had something to do with Cameron Remmer's disappearance? The answer is yes. Moving on. So now that we're into the year 2019, you should probably be able to predict what's coming up next, and that is Steve Pankey. A guy that I'd never heard of before until he contacted me in August of 2019. He was first a Patreon supporter, and then one day he just came out and revealed who he actually was. I just knew him as Steve, and then he told me his entire story, that he was suspected in the in the murder of Janelle Matthews. Her remains had been found in July of 2019. And people have asked me, did you know about Janelle Matthews? I probably ran across her name at one point or another, being that I do so much missing persons reading, and I've done so much over years, well before Unfound ever existed. I'm sure I came across her name at least once. I don't specifically remember that. But when I found out the details, she was at home, and then she wasn't home when her parents got home, and it's in Colorado, it kind of all rang a bell, but I don't know if I could have ever put it together with the name Janelle Matthews. But all of you know what happened. It's just, I interviewed him. This is just kind of like going back to Tom Brown, where you do something and you don't really know You just do it like you'd do anything else, but for some reason it goes in a unique direction. This is kind of what happened with Steve. Now, granted, Steve was a unique guest and is a one-of-a-kind guest, being that he was a suspect in a murder, at least at that point. Just a suspect. And that interview that I did with him for over 3 hours, it's easily for me the interview that I've listened to the most since it came out. And it's certainly the interview that I think the public has heard it the most of. Maybe not the entire thing, but snippets, given that, 48 hours or whatever, Dateline used parts of it. We got, I just did within the last month, I was interviewed for Taking the Stand. It's going to be coming out next year, where I talk about my interaction with Steve, where part of the interview is going to be played. Been working with a company in England. They're working on a series of Janelle Matthews' murder. That whole thing. Obviously, one of the big moments in Unfound's history. And just like a lot of this other stuff, not necessarily something that was on my mind. It was something that kind of just came to me. I didn't seek Steve out. I didn't even know he existed. He came to me. When we get back to Tom Brown and how this is not a situation, as often happens, where myself or Emily, Cherie, whoever, are reaching out to people. Somebody reached out to me. These kind of things just fall into Unfound's lap, and then they become these big deals. And that's certainly what happened with Steve Pankey. And then we talk about the trials, and you now know that Steve eventually got convicted the second time around in October of 2022. And if you don't know, I've become I've started a pen pal writing exchange with Steve. I wrote him a letter in July. He responded to me in August. And I sent out the second letter to him, and I read that letter on a live show, by the way, if you'd be interested to hear what Steve had to say. Kind of didn't really answer anything that I put in that first letter. But anyway, I just sent out, so you can hear what he said on a recent live show on YouTube. You can track it down. And then I sent out a second letter to him. When was it? Not quite a week ago. So maybe around August 23rd or something like that. I sent him a second letter. So I'm corresponding with him as he is in the Belt County Jail in Colorado. And unless something goes differently, he'll be there for the rest of his life. So the Janelle Matthews murder, and then my interaction with Steve Pankey, a huge moment in Unfound's history. We now get into the year 2020. Of course, this is COVID time. And I have to say, looking back retrospectively, did not affect the podcast at all. I mean, I'm a homebody anyway, and of all people who are, social, and I'm still a social person, given that I spend most of my time at home, COVID did not really affect me at all. And the only one time it affected me a couple times a week is when I'd have to go buy food and wear a mask. That was about it. But what went on in 2020, do all of you remember? This is what I still call the most shocking moment in Unfound's history, and that is the finding, of course I didn't find it, but the discovery, the finding of Eric Franks' car. There's some other surprises that have happened over Unfound's existence, but to me, this continues to be number one. Of course, Eric is still missing. But that his car was still in one piece, that it was in running condition, that it had sat in that Gerald Rutledge's garage for all those years, then it got auctioned off, and a guy, it wasn't in Ohio, ended up having it, and a young woman in California periodically would put the VIN of the car into Carfax, and then suddenly it came up because the car got a oil change done on it. Crazy. Nobody could have predicted that. That's what makes disappearances so difficult. That is, to me, the number one surprise, the number one shocking moment in Unfound's existence, to me. Shirley Esther Westenbarger being found in her car in that pond. A little bit of surprise, but I still insist that I know more about disappearance at the time like I know now. Maybe I could have predicted that. And you might have a different, most shocking moment. Maybe Pine Gregory coming across Tom Brown's remains. Maybe that's your most shocking moment. For me, it's Eric Franks' car, because there's not one person who really believed that it was still in one piece running condition. People had to believe it was at the bottom of a lake with maybe Eric in it, or it had been parted out or something. And here it was sitting in that garage that whole time. And I still insist, if I would have been able to put together Kendra caring for Gerald Rutledge, just because of the way I am, I would have done, for whatever reason, it's just the way my mind works, I would have done a street view or Google Earth view just to see where this guy lived in relation to where Eric was staying in that motel and where Kendra lived. Just for that alone, I probably would have gone to a map. But I know I would have noticed on a street view how the garage door, the disconnected garage to Gerald's house in the back, before Eric went missing, it had a garage door with windows. After Eric disappeared, that garage door was changed to one that had no windows. If I'd have known Kendra was connected to Gerald Rutledge, I think I would have been able to put that all together. I think I would have been able to say, I bet that car is in that garage. I know I would have noticed it because I notice these things. It's just the way my mind works. Oh, baby. Just something I missed. But fortunately, the car was found. It easily could have been auctioned off and could be on the road today and nobody would have known. So we just have to be thankful that whoever that, and I think they did an article on this person who did that, who figured that out. Congratulations to that person. That's spectacular. That's great work. I mean, just chef's kiss on that. But Eric Franks' car being, what was that, September of 2020, most shocking moment in Unfound's existence. Unfortunately, nothing has transpired since then. So we now move to 2021. And really, this is something that was supposed to start in 2020, but because of COVID, it didn't. But I finally got to start going to schools and doing my presentations. And the first one I ever did was at Northwestern State in Louisiana. My brother went with me. We had a great road trip, driving up there and back, a great time. He got to kind of see behind the scenes of my podcast because my brother does not help me with it at all. But he got to see my vision of speaking to criminal justice majors, and I'm not sure what he was thinking. Okay, we're going to go up and you're going to do what? I know you do this podcast edit and everything, but what exactly are you doing? But after he saw it, he was like, oh, I get it. Very interesting. And since then, this is how Dr. Telesco and I got to know each other. We do this show on her YouTube channel once a month. And I've gone to Nova Southeastern University twice now to speak. And I videoed it, and some of you have seen that. I've gone to Florida Southern College once. I'm going to be going there again. I've gone down to Florida International University. I think I'm going to be going there again later this year, maybe in November. But that all got started in 2021, and that is all in that direction of education. You know me, I'm all about educating people about disappearances, and especially educating those people who one of these days might be responsible for resolving them, investigating them. And if I can just put that little bit of a nugget in their head that they don't forget. Remember that guy, that long-haired guy who was dressed all in black and came to talk that day? I remember what he said about this, and now I'm a sheriff of a county or an FBI agent. I remember that guy because these people otherwise don't get any missing persons education at all. Zero. But if my presentation can stick out and I can stick out, and that memory of just that hour and a half that I'm up in front of there, I think it can change. I think it can change somebody's life out there. A person who is suffering from a disappearance, missing a daughter or son, it can change something. So these continue to be a big focus. And like I said, I think I'm going to be doing at least 3 of them. I'm going to see if I'm going to Nova Southeastern or not. But certainly I'll be doing at least 2 this coming semester, if not 3, maybe more. Just because I've reached out to just a few colleges within the last few days, within driving distance. So that has been a big moment. Getting that finally going after COVID went away, really have felt good about that. Big moment. And then what I would say is the last big moment, and this occurred at the end of 2022. So Ed, are you saying there haven't been any big moments in 2023? Well, not yet. Sometimes maybe these things take a little bit of time to fully show. Like with Peggy and Patty McDaniel, took a little while before it became what it became at the end of 2017. Tom Brown, the summer of 2018, took a little while before it became what it became. So maybe we're still in that kind of place in 2023 where nothing has made the big moment list quite yet. But maybe something that's already been done this year eventually will. But the last one I would put on the list is my in-depth coverage of Keith Call and Sandra Haley's disappearances. Of course, connected this whole phenomenon of the Colonial Parkway murders. And the way it was a 2-part episode, and how I think I went fact by fact to show that pretty much these murders and the disappearances of Keith and Sandra should not be seen as being connected at all. It certainly seems like it's a weird quirk of statistics, but there are enough facts about each of the murderers and then Keith and Sandra's disappearances to believe that they are all really not connected at all. And really, the reason they got put all together is it was just easier, I think, for reporters at the time when this was all going on to just report on them all as one instead of looking at each as a separate incident. I think that's what happened. But then you know how what occurs for the public. Oh, we got a serial killer. I'm telling you there was no serial killer on the Colonial Parkway at the time of those murders and Keith and Sandra's disappearances. Not at all. In fact, when you look at them individually, you'll see that they weren't done by some strangers. They were all done by people who surely knew their victims, including Sandra and Keith, by the way. And took some crap for that, including the guy who has gained a lot of fame by writing a book about the Colonial Parkway murders. He totally thinks I'm crazy and everything else, but I know what I'm talking about. He's the person who wrote that book for entertainment value, ignoring a lot of stuff. I don't ignore things. So I think I really, even though it's still a Wikipedia page, the Colonial Parkway murders, anybody who really takes an interest in it goes on YouTube, does a search, comes across, or on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, takes an interest in that. My presentation is just a little different, but it surely makes more sense than all the others. And so I think that given it was such a high-profile mystery, and it continues to be to this day for over 30 years, to kind of jump into that and factually show why everybody should be looking at it a different way instead of seeing it in a sensational way, looking in a very constructive way, very critical way. I think that was a big moment. It continues to be a big moment in Unfound's existence. So that is my list. What is your list? What are those big moments from Unfound's history? Once again, resolutions, the conviction of Carlos Rodriguez, Dennis Bowman, Esther Westenbarger being found in that retention pond. Any resolutions don't count. They're always top of the list. Always. Always, always, always. But other than that, what would you put on this list? Please let me know by either emailing me, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com, or you can you can post something in the discussion group. Maybe we can have a good discussion about that on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or wherever else I may be and you may be. You let me know your big moments in Unfound's 7-year history. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.